Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pride in Conversations, which is presented by WDV's youth experts. Thanks to everyone for joining us in person and online today. My name is Bridget Jolly. I work at Women with Disabilities Victoria within our Community Inclusion and Women's Empowerment Program team. I work with our wonderful Youth Experts by Experience group. I'd like to acknowledge country, and I'd like to acknowledge that today we are on the lands of the Bunurong people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders from the past and present, and extend my respects to the lands that other people are on today and to the elders of those lands. I'd also like to acknowledge that the land we're on was stolen and sovereignty was never ceded. WDV affirms that this land was stolen and sovereignty was never ceded, but we also acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonisation. Today's event, Pride in Conversations, aims to spotlight the lived experience of intersecting LGBTQIA+, age, disability, and gendered identities. We recognise that concepts around identity are influenced and impacted by culture. We also recognise that colonisation has played a major role in how First Nations people connect with these ideas of identity. I'd like to thank the Victorian Pride Centre for having us here today. During the event, if there are people who have any questions around the event or WDV as an organisation, please feel free to contact a staff member. For those in person, people have been identified already. And for those online, people will have WDV as part of their Zoom name. I'd like to acknowledge Nadia Mariazzo, WDV's CEO, who is attending online. And I'd also like to acknowledge Liz Wright, the program manager for our Community Inclusion and Women's Empowerment Program team, who was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately can no longer be. Today's event will include unscripted conversations about important and personal topics in relation to identity and lived experiences. Some people may find these topics and conversations affect them personally. We encourage people to practice self-care and utilise the provided service numbers if they are helpful. For everyone, it can be very powerful upon hearing about stories to reflect on what we can do as allies and change makers and act on that moving forward. Our panel members would also like to share a statement. Their statement reads, we want to acknowledge that the members of the LGBTQI+ and disability communities all use different language that is affirming for them. We, as panelists, will be using various language around our varying identities and communities. We also acknowledge that we do not represent these whole communities. We, as a group, give ourselves permission to show up as ourselves. And that includes freely stimming, being inarticulate, and pausing to respond to questions. I'd like to now introduce our very wonderful panel. First, we have Mon Ince. Mon's pronouns are they, them. Mon is an LGBTQI+ mental health and disability rights advocate and artist. Their work is informed by their lived experience as a queer, genderqueer, trans, and disabled young person. With a Bachelor of Arts with honours in gendered studies from the University of Melbourne, Mon researched LGBTQI+ disabled individuals' Instagrams around community formation and protest. They are a peer work program advisor for Headspace National, a youth expert with Women with Disabilities Victoria, and an LGBTQI+ consultant. Mon envisions a future where all individuals can learn, be affirmed, manage their well-being, and develop self-advocacy skills. Our second guest speaker today is Belle Fantasia. Belle, pronoun she, her, is proudly neurodivergent, Greek called queer, asexual empath with psychosocial and learning disabilities. She passionately works and volunteers in the intersectional fields of youth, disability, and mental health, where she focuses on all levels of systemic advocacy. Belle also runs her own online blog called Divergent Belle, where she shares her work, knowledge, and lived experience on social media with the aim of supporting her communities. Also, at WDV, Belle works as part of the youth experts team, sharing her diverse lived experience whilst working with her peers to create community support for young people with disabilities in Victoria. Unfortunately, our original guest speaker of Kelly Butler could not join us today, but very fortunately for us, we have Akii Ngo joining us, and we are very grateful for Akii stepping in. Akii, who uses pronouns they, them, is an internationally multi-award-winning disability advocate and activist. They are deeply passionate about disability rights, intersectionality, inclusion, and co-design. They are a proud disabled, transgender, non-binary, and LGBTQIA+/queer person of colour. Akii is a consultant, trainer, educator, presenter, and accessibility manager at Sydney World Pride and the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, and is a senior co-design and engagement advisor at the National Disability Insurance Agency. Akii is a counsellor for the Victorian Disability Council. I'd like to now hand over to our very wonderful panel to guide us on a conversation around pride in conversations.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey team. Nice to have everyone here and eager to have this conversation. I think maybe a really great place to start would just be, what does, pride mean to each of us? Yeah, I'm happy to take us away. But yeah, so pride for me is a really complex idea. And I think it means something quite different in a lot of ways to a lot of different people, but can also mean quite similar things at times as well. For me, pride is kind of both an internal experience that we have. It's a personal experience, and it's something that is very much a journey and doesn't always stay consistent. But I also think pride is quite external in the sense that I gain a lot of my understanding of pride through connection to community and seeing how, the rest of the community experiences pride themselves and show up for each other and build that kind of safe space to really discuss that experience and find connections together. And then also pride is very much a theme that I like to use throughout my work and my art practice as well. So that's me. Does anybody else want to?
Yeah, I'll hop in. So for me, very similarly to what pride means to you, is it very much means community. It means understanding myself and my different identities, but it also means being really proud of who I am. And, thanks to that understanding, being able to share that with other people, and that being something I feel so confident about, and being able to support others in their journey of self-understanding, but also in, figuring out their kind of like sexual identity or gender identity, because it can be quite complex and everyone goes on their own unique journey and it's different for every single person. because also pride plays a lot into that intersectional experience of your other identities as well, because you can't necessarily understand one without the other. But like I said, everyone has their own experience. Yeah, I'll pass to you, Akii.
Pride. Well, I think first of all, can I just do an image description of myself? Because I feel like I need to do that. So I'm just sitting in my power wheelchair. I'm wearing a pink blazer. I've got pink, purple, and blue. Wait, is it pink, purple, and blue hair, which is the bisexual flag? It's curled. I've got rainbow bead shoelaces on my boots for the Rainbow Shoelace Project, which supports LGBTQIA youth. I'm wearing black pants, pink blazer, and a bright green top. And I've got my service dog in training who is fast asleep on my lap. She's a chocolate dapple named Kiki. And I'm wearing my they, them pronoun badge. Pride to me means inclusion. And that also means accessibility. It means including all of us. And it also means feeling safe and welcome, just as we are. And ensuring that no matter what you are and what letter of the entire acronym you fit in, or multiple parts of the acronym and your other intersections or identities are included, valued, and respected, which also means making LGBTIQA spaces accessible, valued, to ensure that members, regardless of what their background is, feel included and valued. And within that, acknowledging that you belong. And I think pride is having belonging in yourself, but also feeling community and connectedness to everyone else, and having that shared sense of safety, respect, and joy. And I think in today's day and age, with the current rhetoric that's been happening, it's been very difficult to have pride, but we persist, and our existence is resistance. And it's, I guess, really great to be able to have these conversations to make people aware that we have always existed and will continue to exist and have power in our resistance.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's really powerful words. And yeah, something that I feel like can resonate with a lot of different people, both here in the room and virtually as well. Because yeah, pride does need to be accessible, inclusive, and there for absolutely everyone out there, and not just for an exclusive group.
Yeah, and I think you make an interesting point. Like, I know leading up to this event, I personally have had to really renegotiate and kind of think more about what my feelings of pride are, when the last 6 months, but in general really, have been quite difficult for community, particularly as a trans and gender diverse person. And I guess maybe that leads us into another sort of topic that we can talk about, which is how do each of us sort of negotiate and maintain our feelings of pride when we are going through really hard times, either personally or as a community more broadly?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because it can be tough to maintain that pride when kind of everywhere around you, when it feels especially like everywhere around you, especially out in the world, feels so negative and is throwing so much kind of hate or disrespect or anything like that at you, and trying to just maintain that feeling of confidence and pride in just who you are and in your community. And you feel like you kind of you have that responsibility to step up and do your best to support your community, which can be hard, especially when you're not feeling in such a great place. And when you're kind of rethinking yourself, and you start to kind of overanalyze and overthink a lot of different parts of who you are, because of all of these hateful things that are being said about your community and about who you are, and it feels like a personal attack, and it's just really tough. But you know, I always try to kind of come back to myself and, you know, remind myself why I feel this way, and, you know, remind myself of what makes me feel that pride and what gives me that strength to keep going every day, and to not change who I am just because of these horrible things that are being said, and that are very public and that end up what feels like everywhere. And, you know, the stand that you really have to take against that, and also being an ally to, you know, your friends around you, and to others in that community, and what it really means to be a leader. And I've got to be quite honest, I only recently, over the last about 6 months, discovered my own personal identity and connection with queer pride. And it's been a bit of a journey of, you know, really understanding what that means for me. And amongst all of the stuff that happens out in the world, especially over the last couple of months of this year, with what's been happening with the protests about drag story time and bits and pieces, it's really been challenging to feel that connection and to feel that that identity and that comfort, and pride in who I am, through not just my queer identity, but in who I am completely, because all of my identities make up who I am. It's not just one that makes up who I am, and they're all as equally important as each other. And it's been just a real eye-opening journey of being like, oh, I'm actually a part of this community. You know, I want to stand up and be more than just an ally for this community. I want to be a part of it. This is, you know, who I am. And that's been so strong for me. And yeah, it's been very, very interesting and confusing at times.
So valid. Akii, what are your thoughts?
It's ridiculously difficult to have pride when people don't respect who you are, when people constantly misgender you, when doctors don't take you seriously, when health professionals don't value that part of who you are, because it's too quote unquote difficult. It's honestly, there's so much resistance against accepting you for who you are and respecting you in every aspect of our lives. Like, we can't even get into the building sometimes, let alone having our gender respected, valued. So it's very difficult to maintain a sense of pride within yourself when the world keeps telling you that there's something wrong with you, or you're a problem that needs to be fixed. So I guess the best way to maintain that is to have your community, to surround yourself with people that treat you with respect, with dignity, to make more queer friends, connect with others that understand your challenges, whether that be through disability inaccessibility. So what is the term? Like access, intimacy, that sort of stuff, like, because we understand the challenges of the world. We move around the world differently from others. And then you add the layer of being LGBTQIA+ and the challenges there, and how people don't accept, acknowledge, or value you. So you surround yourself with people that understand those challenges and the difficulties around living in a world that doesn't want you or isn't built for you. And then you build, I guess, the world that you need around you and the community that you need to support you, to remind yourself that you are worthy of being who you are, just as you are, whether that be disabled, queer, LGBTIQ, and have all the aspects and intersections of who you are valued and respected through your community, but whether that be virtually or in person. Make connections, go to these events, network with others, learn that you're not alone in your experience, even though at times it feels so deeply isolating, especially if you're in a medicalized setting and you're not valued, you're not treated with dignity and respect as a disabled person, let alone a disabled queer person, let alone a disabled queer trans person of color. You're just, you're stripped away and you're so medicalized and treated so clinically that you don't even feel human. And then when you're in that state, when all you want is support and help, and they're treating you less than, it's so difficult to then be like, can you also respect my pronouns? Because like to them, it's like not even a big deal, but it's like, why are you re-traumatizing me when you could just respect who I am? And I think they don't actually know. They do know. They know. There's statistics, there's literature, like, you know, the suicide rates for youth is ridiculously high in the LGBTIQ space. Suicide rates are the highest in young people. The medical profession, the health professions, everyone knows that, but they don't take us seriously. So we keep fighting, we keep sharing, and we keep banging out the same thing and saying, just effing respect us and treat us with dignity and value us, affirm us, because it is life-saving. But I think that's the difficulty. So I don't know, at the end of the day, do what you can to put yourself in situations where you don't have to say sorry for who you are.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Absolutely, yes. That, yeah, I relate to that so much. But yeah, you haven't had a chance, so I'll let you share.
Well, I mean, just like totally in agreement with a lot of what you both have been saying. But I think something that I've found, like my journey through, I don't know, accepting my identity has changed quite a lot. And so my, feeling like engaging with feelings of pride when it comes to, initially it was like my sexuality, and then it was, like disability. And then after that, it was my gender identity. And it's kind of been this really interesting process. And each of them have their own interesting, I don't know, nuances and experience and whatnot. But something that I've really tried to, or keep coming back to in this process, where you're right, like the world is a really hard place to be who we are at any given time. And I think recognizing that there is space to feel multiple things at once. Like you can absolutely be sure of who you are, or comfortable maybe not labeling who you are and letting that be fluid, and connecting with community and seeing how strong and amazing and resilient we are, at the same time as recognizing that this is hard. And sometimes it's exhausting. And sometimes it's like, do I want to have to step up today and advocate? Or do I want to be able to just show up as myself and not have to apologize or fight for me or for anybody else? Because I think, you know, and this really does come down to the topic of like privilege. Like there is privilege in never having to, think about these things, that if you can just wake up every day and go about your life without having to question, is it safe for me to disclose to my doctors that I am gender diverse, or this is the person, you know, I'm in a same-sex relationship, or whatever it may be. But it's really helped me knowing that, like, I can feel both of those things, and I can connect and embrace my pride at the same time. And I think that helps everyone be gentle with themselves.
Yeah, you bring up some really interesting stuff. One I want to go back to is when you talked about being like gender fluid, or, you know, using fluid terms. Like for me personally, a big part of my journey has been, you know, kind of understanding what asexuality is, but also understanding that spectrum, and also the spectrum of a queer identity. And a large part of it was kind of landing on how I wanted to kind of label myself, because me personally, I attach quite closely to labels because I felt so misunderstood my entire life due to a late diagnosis of autism and every other disability that I have, and just struggling through just a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of negativity and trauma and other really crappy bits and pieces. So when I was understanding my queer identity, I kind of ended up deciding that I want to use a term that is a bit more open and that doesn't really feel like I'm boxing myself in completely, because I feel like for myself, sexuality is something that can change over time, because we're always discovering who we are every single day. We don't wake up feeling the same way every single morning. It's something different. You know, the way we experience the world changes around us, whether we like it or not. There's just kind of the nature of what things are. So when deciding kind of what label I was going to take, I kind of decided to use the label queer, because I'm not necessarily sure if I'm going to be asexual my entire life. That might change. Right now, it feels like that. And I kind of associate really closely with that because of the way that I've come to understand my autism, ADHD, and neurodiversity with how I interact with other people and what I'm comfortable with. But, you know, as I get older and interact with more people and, you know, experience the world a lot more, because I am very young and I'm still very like early on into understanding who I am, I know that that's going to change. So, you know, when associating with community and bits and pieces, I use a more fluid kind of open term, kind of similarly to how I define my disabilities, because I don't feel that ADHD and autism covers who I am as a person with invisible disabilities. So I use the term neurodivergent because I feel like that more clearly defines how my disabilities kind of appear and kind of encases that spectrum that I feel like I sit amongst with the different neurodiverse kind of diagnoses and bits and pieces like that.
Yeah, for sure. Fluidity is a really interesting concept. And like, I think recognizing and allowing yourself the space to know that that is one likely to change at times, but also like that's something, there's something really beautiful about that and unrestricted that I think is a real strength within our communities, that, you know, we allow ourselves the room to be like, I might not always be presenting as like the person that I am today. And, you know, I feel a little bit sad for people who don't allow themselves that room. Yeah, like it's beautiful.
I guess it's my turn to say something.
You don't have to.
No.
It just feels like we just go around and share kind of based on what each of us is saying. There's not really any kind of planned element to what we're doing.
No, it makes sense. I think the term queer is obviously reclaimed for our community, obviously having been a slur in the past. I think that allows us the freedom to be any part of the Rainbow Mafia, the LGBTQIA because it's so broad. And I think, like, as we mentioned in the beginning, like we don't represent every single part of the LGBTQIA community, and we don't represent every person with a disability. And even a person with the exact same type of disability as someone else doesn't have the same life experiences based on every other aspect of who they are. I'm also autistic. I also have ADHD. I was only diagnosed in the past few years, so like almost 3 decades, thinking that I just didn't belong and thinking that why the F did my teachers not realize when I was at the back of the classroom banging my head against the wall, overstimulated and upset? Why did they not pick that up? Because I was a student that was excelling, and that's all that mattered. Because I was an overachiever, but so therefore, because my grades were great, that my everything else or my struggles just didn't matter. So in relation to identifying with queerness and identifying with, you know, I didn't have that privilege. I couldn't explore that. My parents were refugees. Having a roof over my having a roof over my head and food on the table was all I could ask for. That was the bar. That was my bar my entire life. Not until I moved out of home at 15, experienced homelessness, like paved my own way through working, studying, blah, 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 a million jobs at a time, to get to a point where I had the privilege to even explore my identity, because, you know, I was too busy staying alive. I was too busy surviving to even consider, can I be queer? Can I be this person? Can I, you know, not be cis? Because, not be cis, not be straight. Like, what is this? Because that was all a privilege, because you know, I had food on the table and a roof over my head. I should be, and education, like being in Australia, like coming from a refugee background, those are all the things you should be thankful and grateful for. So, you know, thinking about, why didn't I get a diagnosis? Why wasn't I supported? Why wasn't I valued? Why didn't I have the supports growing up? Why couldn't I explore my queer identity, understand who I was? None of that was on the table because that was a privilege, because I had food on the table, you know? And so it's so different now that I got to a point where in my life I could explore those things and really think about who I was and who I am and be proud of that. Disability pride as well as queer pride, you know, and recognizing that I have community, and that's only strengthened over the years as I've come to realize that there's no shame in who I am, just as I am. And having worked at Sydney World Pride, and literally there was only two hetero people. It was amazing. It was the first time in my entire 12-year career that I felt safe in a workplace, you know, and that's really sad. Like, you know, every other, you know, to really, because I was who I am, just as I was, valued and respected, which is so hard when, you know, you don't realize that that's the norm, and that isn't the norm, because we have to pick and choose when we disclose, how we disclose. You know, are they going to use our disclosures against us? Are they, like, whether that be disability or LGBTIQ-ness?
The challenge is job security, doesn't it?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things to consider, and we're doing that constantly while trying to stay alive, while trying to manage, you know, our accessibility needs, our access needs. Wow, like there's so much going on.
There's an art to balancing your mental health with your disabilities, with your queer identity, with every part of you. There's a true art in trying to navigate it all and not feel so crushed by the end of the day. You're so tired and exhausted from so much of it. Just like everything you're saying is so relatable, and makes me reflect on the privilege that Mon and I have to work for Women with Disabilities Victoria, because we know it's a safe space. We know that it's a welcoming space. We can be ourselves in our work, and, you know, if we need to take time out, we can. And it's just that privilege of flexibility and understanding.
I think yeah, it's also interesting to discuss the fact, like, all three of us are working in lived experience work. We're highly visible people, right? And we've chosen to, you know, whatever our varying reasons may be, enter into careers where we do put ourselves wholly out there on display. And I think, you know, there is a mutual sort of effect there where we're both privileged, as you say, to work in places where we are safe enough to do so, but at the same time, recognizing that we are with high visibility comes risk. We and I think I certainly experience this as a like visibly genderqueer person, particularly when I have, you know, my full tattoos on display and everything. Yeah, like it can be a really difficult thing, but I just felt like, for me, well, I studied gender studies. It was pretty clear that this was like the area that I wanted to go into. Like, there was just kind of no option or alternative. And the further I got down that line, yeah, of, you know, professional queer or whatever you want to call it, like, there's kind of no going back for me now. I'm very happy to be in these spaces. And I think I sometimes really have to think about, like, what does that mean to be somebody who is highly visible? And a lot of it is privilege. And it's recognizing that there are a lot of people out there who don't have that privilege. They don't have the ability to, like, they may want to work in spaces like I do, or they may want to just hold the hand of their partner walking down the street, or you know, use their mobility aids without fear of harassment. And if I, walking around with my short hair and rainbow pins and whatever else, bring them some comfort, knowing that they're not the only person in the world going through those experiences, because at the end of the day, like community is community, whether people are in or outside of the closet. And that is the same both for disability and queerness, you know.
Yeah, I'm going to say that we're very lucky to have you a part of our team. And yeah, there is an element of privilege of where we work, but I think it's also with that comes the balance of, you know, the weight of being an advocate and supporting this community and, you know, feeling that pressure sometimes to kind of do more and to be better and to, you know, be more outspoken and, you know, kind of listen more closely to community and try to address a lot of the issues that are around. But the reality is that we can't address absolutely every issue that is out there, especially as a lot of them are ongoing, and facing that reality and kind of figuring out and supporting each other to try to navigate that balance and to not wear ourselves out, because burnout is a very significant thing in our field of work. And it can get really bad, and we do need to practice a lot of self-care to manage that. It is really tough to be not just an advocate for one identity, but also several, because, you know, we're advocates for the disability community, we're advocates for the queer community. In my case, I'm also an advocate for the mental health community, same with Mon. And I also play a role in being an advocate for the youth community as well. And it can get quite overwhelming trying to kind of figure it out all out and to feel like you're doing the right thing by every part of those communities, and trying to really support that intersectionality and further understanding in those communities. But yeah, it feels good at the end of the day. I got quite lucky because with every part of my autism, every special interest I've had, which is 3 so far, has always ended up being what I want to do for a job and a career. So I got my autism diagnosis and dived headfirst, not intentionally, but it kind of just happened. Because at the same time as getting my diagnosis back in like the peak of 2020, COVID, oh my God, I was also doing a leadership course with the Youth Disability Advocacy Service. And that really sparked my keen interest in the disability space and the advocacy space and wanting to explore more and discovering the frustration that my own local community doesn't have support for young people with disabilities. And just like that anger kind of just fueled my passion, and it kind of just, I've ended up in this career, which I am absolutely in love with. And I love the people I work with because they're absolutely wonderful and so kind and so accepting. But it definitely is a privilege to be able to do the work that we do. And it's not something that absolutely everyone can do because, you know, there's so many challenges out there that have to be overcome. And it is such a unique thing to balance the kind of work that we do with our personal lives as well.
I love that you used the word anger just then. Like, yeah, I think it, in the context of conversation of pride, right? Like, I think anger is something that maybe on the outside looking in, if you're not involved in these communities, it can be like when you hear the term pride, you think Mardi Gras, you think rainbows and glitter and all of this, but the reality is that like pride is pride and protest. Like we have strong roots in protest. And I think recognizing that both in all of the conversations we have, like the ones we're having today, with the people that we work with you know, the people we invite into our lives. Yeah, like it's not all glitters and rainbow, and that anger is really, at least for me, what drives me and, you know, keeps things moving forward. Like if we weren't fighting for something.
I do also want to acknowledge that we're very lucky to have in the past a lot of strong people fight for, you know, where we stand today and to pave that path. And, you know, in the work that we do, I feel very much appreciative, and you learn the significant understanding of those who have come before you and how much harder it was for them and how grateful you are for where we are now, but also understanding how much work we have to still put in to make sure that we can get to that end goal of being able to have that equity, that inclusion, that accessibility, that understanding, that absolutely everything, to live in that world that is just the ideal world that suits absolutely everyone, which is so tough to achieve. But yeah, you've got to always, I always try to remember that, you know, the work that I'm doing, you know, there'll be another young person that comes up that will be in a role similar to mine at WDV that will get to see something like this that has happened in the past, and hopefully it will help inspire them to keep moving forward and to keep creating change. Because yeah, we're not going to be young forever. Yeah, I actually want to ask you, Akii, you know, it would have been
As the oldest person here. Oh, sorry, out of the
Oh my
three
gosh,
of
you're
us.
so
Yeah.
old.
so old. Oh my God, it's almost like you're 30. I want to ask, because it would have been very different for you, because you said you've been doing this for about 12 years, right?
Yeah, I started uni when I was 15. So I finished uni very early. I started working very early. So I guess even though we're not that different in age, we are different in generation, because in today's day and age, I believe, based on what I've witnessed, it is easier, and because there is more widespread mainstream understanding of being LGBTIQA. One of the questions was, what was your coming out story? So for me, I guess I haven't come out because I don't think people should come out. I just am as I am. And if people don't know that, and if people don't respect that, then they don't and shouldn't be in my life. But I did it in a workplace because it's a protected attribute. So I was like, these are my pronouns, please respect them. Don't refer to me as pronouns that are not mine, because this is who I am. And I was told that I was mentally ill and all trans people should be in asylums. This was the board of the organization that I worked for. Safe to say, it was really, really traumatic and really, really friggin' painful. And I had to fight, as you mentioned, to be respected and valued. There was a lot of tears and a lot of, you know, also like dealing with my disabilities and dealing with being in and out of hospital, and then being told that I don't care if you're black, yellow, and blue, but that's not grammatically correct. And, you know, all of the excuses under the sun for not using a person's pronouns or respecting their cultural identity and other things like that. There was a Fair Work thing. It was a whole thing. It was very traumatic, but it's also having the capacity to fight back and say, that's not okay. And going, do I just let this slide and just go to a different employer and hope for the best and keep my fingers crossed? And part of me was like, I don't have the mental, emotional, physical, financial capacity to fight. But at the same time, I don't want this to happen to another person. So I fought and got what I got out of it. And I think that was really difficult, because then, like, that's the thing, you know, you don't, in the beginning of my career, I didn't disclose my disabilities. I didn't disclose the disabling chronic pain that I live in every single day. I didn't disclose any of the complex chronic illnesses that I have, because I didn't want to be discriminated against. And then when I finally discovered who I was and wanted my pronouns to be respected, I went through the exact same process, but even in a more traumatic way, because of the double discrimination that I experienced. And so I never wanted to do it again. I wanted to be in fetal position in a corner and just never work and, you know, be who I was. But I'm like, you know, that's not okay, because I think the next generation deserves to be who you are as you are and feel safe in your workplaces. So I went and am and continue to try to be, I guess, what I want the world to be like. So that's when I also started to share my experiences of being a survivor advocate of intimate partner and family violence. That's when I started working in the gendered violence space, because as we are aware, people with disabilities, particularly women, girls, feminine identifying and non-binary people, are disproportionately impacted by violence, particularly also if you're queer and or trans in that space. So I was like, how do I expect members who have experienced that, community members, to share that and ask and seek help if I'm not willing to share my story. So that's kind of where I started and where I have continued to. And I hope that I've been making a difference within the community, within younger people that are going through their first job, second jobs, careers, whatever they want to be, to realize that it is possible to be who you are as you are. And also, like, people stare at me all the time because I'm a young person in a wheelchair. I'm like, well, if they're going to stare, I might as well make myself, bright and pretty and whatever, have colorful hair, be who I am. Because if they're going to stare, give them something to look at, and be proud of that. And I think that at the end of the day, if you hold your ground and realize that there is connection and community, and the people that just don't get it, and don't waste your energy on that, like there's an opportunity where you can educate, where people will be receptive to that education. And there will be there's situations where no matter what you do, no matter what you say, how you say it, in whatever way you frame it, people just won't be receptive to that. And there's no point in wasting your energy in trying to educate someone who's racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, X, Y, Z under the sun. And I think the people that are in between are where you can create that change and, create that movement to see that we're just human beings that want to be respected and treated with dignity.
Like, is that so hard? Is that such an outrageous expectation?
Yeah, is it so, like, on the same lines, just, is it so hard to actually be inclusive and accessible? Is it like, it's not that hard to make a footpath, flat, so, you can actually roll your wheelchair down it. It's not that hard to, come up with image descriptions and make your digital content accessible. Like, I feel like it's such a ridiculous thing that the world sees all of these different bits and pieces as extremely difficult and, such a huge deal and everything like that.
I think a great example of this, like, I've thought about this a lot since the pandemic, like a classic example, like where the blame is always put on us, like, they them pronouns are too hard, making accessible changes in the workplace or in buildings or every situation is too hard. But we've been asking, like, the disabled community has been asking for work from home setups for a very long time. And then it wasn't until the pandemic hit and mainstream society was also affected that they realized, hey, increasing this or investing in this accessibility benefits everyone, that we adapted to that. Our whole landscape in the working environment has changed. And where, like, for the first time, I know, like, I work fully remotely. I could not possibly maintain a job and independence in the way that I do without the accommodations that have come out, particularly from the pandemic.
And that's so relatable for the whole disability community. And I've heard bits and pieces throughout the community at the moment with, there's a potential, because employers are understanding long COVID, that, there's actually a chance that, they might start understanding chronic health as a result, what's it called? Chronic fatigue syndrome, and bits and pieces like that, and being actually, accommodating and understanding, instead of dismissive, because, they're invisible and, chronic health isn't valid, which is such a load of BS, because it is valid. And, it's just this thing that it's annoying that, for the public, or for like someone that isn't, that doesn't identify as disabled, it's annoying that, for them to experience something significant, that's the only way the disability community can actually get a step forward, and be understood, and a difference can be made. I do want to say though, we are very lucky to have you on this panel, and it has been such an amazing time getting to know you as well. I'm personally a bit of a fan, because you do some really incredible work. If you don't already know, Akii has a lot of like different socials and has been in like Melbourne Fashion Week and bits and pieces, and just does a lot of incredible advocacy work. So please go check them out and everything like that. I will,
Shameless plug.
Yeah,
We love
shameless
it.
plug.
I mean, it's not shameless because I didn't do it. But,
Yeah, but you're right. You're right. You're
True.
right.
I think on the note of that, be the change you want in the world. And on the note of modeling and representation, there wasn't any when I was growing up. For me, there was Lucy Liu, literally the only person, like honestly, like in the 90s, that was the only Lucy Liu isn't like queer from my knowledge. So like that was the only representation, obviously, and also not disabled. So that was one part of my representation that I saw growing up as a child, and that was it. I think that is so not okay. So go out and be that change. So I was like, okay, if it doesn't exist, I'll be that representation. I'll go out and do that. And so that's what I've done, and that's what I continue to do. And we are slowly getting more representation, but I'm still like, I just came from Fashion Week and I was misgendered Cairns Fashion Week, and I was misgendered the entire time. And they had voiceovers that were still gendered going, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And I told the stage manager, like, that is not okay. Like that is gendered. You know, you need to make sure that you knew, like, it's not my one, I'm a model, I'm there to do my job, not educate you, but I couldn't not, because their tagline was inclusivity, diversity, and style. And I'm like, if you are not going to get it right, do not promote that you are, you know, and that frustrates me. And so I went there to kind of go, because I do training in the space. I train like Melbourne fashion, the city of Melbourne for their accessibility and all that stuff, because I have the unique insights from being a model as well as being a trainer and assessor within the space. So, you know, it's so frustrating when organizations, businesses, whatever, promote that they're inclusive and they're diverse, when they think having one disabled model is inclusive, one wheelchair user as inclusive. Like that's tokenistic. So I'm constantly banging on about non-tokenistic representation and having intersectional, diverse experience represented, because we can have, like, we have the same, some of the same disabilities, and we don't have the same experiences because we have different upbringings. We have so many different components of who we are. And yet people go, yay, tick a box, move on. And that is so frustrating. So go out, be that change, and also make sure that the people, they don't know what they don't know, but once they do know what they know, they need to go out and make that difference. And I think that is the most important part.
And we shouldn't have to like chase them up on that, like to make sure that they do it. If you're going to commit to being accessible, do it.
And that's such a beautiful message as well, to share. And to wrap up a bit, because I think we are running a bit over time slightly. Thank you so much, Akii, for joining us, and especially for all of your incredible insight. It has been so wonderful having you on the panel today. I think now we're going to go into time for the final statement. Oh, okay, cool.
What's the final statement?
You want to give your final statement? Because I haven't come up with mine yet.
Oh, throw me under the bus here.
Yes, happily.
What would I like to say? Well, maybe I'll end on some advice that I think I wish I had known at various stages of my journey, because I kind of view it in 3 installments: sexuality, disability, gender. And this kind of comes through in the artwork that I produced for today,
And poem,
yes. That there are going to be people who don't get you, that don't like you, that don't want to even try. Don't worry or spend your time thinking about them. Like you were saying before, there's a small group of people who are in that middle zone. They're the people you should be putting your attention towards, but also that it's okay for all of this to be personal. We obviously have chosen this path for ourselves, but it is not the right path for everybody. And just because you're in this community, it doesn't mean that you have to be as loud as we are. It comes from within you. You get to decide how you want to live your life. And I know for me, I will accept you regardless of how visible you are. You belong. So I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I think I'm going to go with along the lines of, you know, just because you feel like you're not seen, you're not heard or understood, doesn't mean that you are not valid, and that, you know, we all present differently, we all think differently, and I think there's a beauty in that that is often quite frequently misunderstood. And that, you know, I think you've got to look within yourself and discover your own pride first before worrying about kind of how the world sees pride. And a lot of my journey has been self-understanding and exploration, and, you know, finding out what is really important to me and what I value. But also, as I've gotten into my early 20s, realizing that I get to pick and choose who I have around me, and those who disrespect me do not, they're the people I can feel free to just kick out of my life, because I don't need someone that's not going to, you know, support me and understand me and be there for me. I'm like old enough and I'm lucky enough to have the privilege to pick and choose who I want around, and, you know, that I know that my workspaces are really safe, and that's a really lucky thing to have, and that I'm always making friends in my workspaces, and getting to meet incredible people. So yeah, my last thing would be to say that you are valid. Figure out who you are first before worrying about the rest of the world.
On that note, whether that be your blood family or otherwise, you know, just because they're blood, you don't need to have them in your life if they don't love and respect you. And I know that I do share that from a place of privilege retrospectively, but when I was like 15 and living with strangers I found on Gumtree, you know, that was not a good place. But, you know, at least I felt okay with myself, and I was out of an environment that wasn't conducive to my well-being and my safety. Obviously not just disability, queerness, lots of intergenerational trauma, you know, having parents as refugees, being a first generation Aussie. But I think also recognizing that if you're never ready to share your story, whether it be from whatever it is, it's okay, because there are other people that are doing it for you to help pave the way to make sure that you can be who you are just as you are. And if you're not feeling up already, that's okay too. It doesn't, like, as long as you know within yourself that you have nothing to be ashamed of, disability, LGBTIQA-ness, whatever it may be, and recognize that who you are is okay, and you don't need to justify your existence to anyone. We're all here for a reason, and we're all here to live the life that we deserve to live. And I think trying to justify that or validate that to other people can be a very challenging endeavor. And within that, you know, endless and heartbreaking at times. So find your community, recognize that there are people that will support you, even if you're not ready to share your story or whatever it is, and know that there are people and organizations that care and want to make a difference, and find your connections. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Amazing.
Wow. Thank you so much to Mon, Belle and Akii. There's been some really great conversations in that and discussions, and I think things for us to reflect on for a long time. We're now going to take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, we'll have roughly a 20-minute Q&A session. For those online, Vanessa will have further directions on how the Q&A would work. But in the meantime, we encourage everyone to take a proper break, have a stretch, get a drink, go to the bathroom, and we will be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back. Let's get into some questions. So for those who are online, you should have been directed in how to ask the question, and knowing that your questions will be relayed on by the wonderful Bridget Stone. If you are in the room and you have a question, could you please raise your hand high or alert us in a way that works for you to let us know that you have a question? We'll be doing questions for approximately 20 minutes. If we have so many wonderful questions and we don't have time for all of them, please come let me know afterwards what your questions are, and we will try and get some responses for people after the event. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand or let us know on Zoom.
Thank you. So I'm Rochelle. I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Advisor at No to Violence, and I probably have more of a statement than a question. I think the future is in very good hands with young people like you. I've been doing this work for 20 years, and so many of the things that you all said there today are the things that I believe and the things that I've seen. So you are all well beyond your years. And I'm looking forward to the future that you're going to bring. And there was a couple of things I was going to say that you did bring up, and that's about you need to look after yourself. You're not going to please all the people all the time, and you will go crazy if you try. I know, I've been there. But, have that self-compassion. Pick your battles, and it's okay, even if you've been doing it for a while, to take some time out for you as well. And as you said, self-care, it's really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really lovely.
Yeah, it's really sweet. Yeah, I'm really bad at taking compliments. But yeah, that was just really wonderful. Yeah, it's how I feel about both Mon and Akii. Yeah, they both do such incredibly amazing work. And it is tough sometimes balancing our work with our personal lives and, taking care of ourselves as well. It is a lot. But I know for Mon and I, with the work that we do at WDV, that, we have that flexibility as we need. And we've got such an incredible, what's your role, Bridget? I don't know. I feel like I'm going to call you my manager, but I know that's Liz. So I'm like this gray area, team leader, maybe?
Technically, it is a supervise you.
That's the word. Thank you. Yeah, we're so lucky to have an amazing supervisor with Bridget, who, we know that we can let them know about anything that is going on in our lives. And, we have that flexibility if we're not feeling so well, that, there's no pressure to attend work as long as we maintain contact and, keep the team kind of all in the know-how of how each of us are doing. So it's really awesome. And I personally feel very, very fortunate and lucky to have found this position.
I think that was not my experience. My experience was very, 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 very opposite to that most of my career, until I got to the point where I decided, even though I probably didn't have the money to decide, that I don't want to work at a workplace that will discriminate me based on my disability, based on my chronic illnesses, based on things that I don't have control of. And if I disclose who I am and they have a problem with it, it's on them. And I wouldn't want to work there anyway. And so they don't get the privilege of me. And that also includes respecting who I am, my gender, my disabilities, my chronic illnesses, my transness, my, cultural differences, if they're going to be racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, they don't deserve me and I don't want to work there. And I think when I realized that, and also the same, like having colorful hair, like this was back in now, before nurses could have tattoos and doctors, that sort of phase, like piercings, tattoos, colorful hair, things that were not quote unquote work appropriate. I just didn't want to work there because who I am is fine by me. And if you have a problem with it, you don't deserve the privilege of working with me. You don't have the privilege of my knowledge. You don't have the privilege of my expertise. And I will find a workplace that will accept me as I am and get my professional expertise as well as my lived experience. I think it took a really, really long time to get to that point. It took about 8 years before I went, if they don't want me as I am, I'm going to move on to somewhere that does. And it's a really difficult position to be in when you need a job to pay for the roof over your head, but you will find a place that will accept you. It will take time. And I think in today's day and age, because people have more mainstream awareness of a lot of those things, it's a lot less okay to be discriminatory. It's a lot less okay to be racist. It's a lot less okay to be, well, at least outwardly, you know, microaggressions and stuff still happen every day, but at least it's not okay to be openly that way. And I think, you know, I've experienced those changes over time. And I've realized I bring value. And if you realize that you have value within yourself and who you are, you hold so much more strength and power, and they want you more because you value yourself. And then you can be the one holding the cards and not the potential employer or the employer. I think we need to recognize that. So yes, that is also, I guess, a way of self-compassion and self-love and self-care by recognizing that not everyone has the privilege to get to know you if they don't want to value you.
100%. You are like getting to know you, inviting somebody into your life is a privilege. Like, yeah.
Yeah, lived experience, I also just want to add to what you were saying, is very much the essence of everything you just mentioned. You know, it's, you know, you pay us for our knowledge because our knowledge and our experiences are unique and are important and are significant. If you don't want to pay us, it means you don't value us. It means that, you know, you're not going to get that lived experience unless you find someone else who doesn't really necessarily understand the value of lived experience themselves. Because yeah, doing work for free is not something that should happen for those of us who want to work in a lived experience space. Because, you know, despite we don't have formal qualifications, like I absolutely have no formal qualifications whatsoever, it doesn't mean that my lived experience is not a qualification, because it is. Me living my life every single day is what qualifies me to work and support community, because it's helped me to build my understanding of myself and my community and the things around me. You know, my experiences are so valuable. And I think that's something that is still being it's a thing that's still being understood in the workplace. And I think, you know, between the three of us, you know, we're a really powerful bunch of showing those values of, you know, lived experience and how important it is, and the fact that, you know, there is paid work for it, and there are people that understand its value and its significance.
And that it's okay to turn down positions that require you to share very deeply personal things about yourself and your experience if they are not willing to compensate you.
Yeah. Thanks for those responses so much. We might keep going for questions.
Yes, we've just got a couple on a line. So I will now just bear with me because this is new. Okay, Liz, would you like to unmute and ask your question, and I'll relay it to our panel.
Hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I just want to know, as someone that's worked in a very mainstream environment for most of my adult life, and I'm much older than the young people on the panel here, I have found great community in working in an organisation that is about disability, and that there is no one has to hide or no one has to
I just
disclose.
want to say how lucky we are to have this very adorable, heartbreakingly cute dog here.
So yes, you've been upstaged, Liz, by...
Yeah, I know. Animals always do that. Never work with animals or kids. Anyway, my question is the broader community adapting to understanding about nuances in identity and gender, or is it still just so narrow?
Okay, so Liz's question, who is our manager at WTV. This is very weird because I can hear myself. Liz would like to know if the understanding within the Pride community is broadening, and if it's becoming more accepting. Is that?
No. Can you hear me, Bridget, still?
Yes.
No, I wanted to know, like, I feel at home at WDV because it's the first workplace I've worked in where nearly everybody that works there has a disability. So we have the opportunity to be ourselves. We have the
Okay, so at where Liz works at WDV, there's a lot of people with disability and she feels at home.
So beforehand, I was working in mainstream, like government mainly, and fighting all the time to get change to occur. Do the panel think that there is a broadening understanding of difference in mainstream worlds, or are they more comfortable sticking with LGBTQIA plus
Okay,
communities?
sorry, Liz.
Right.
Right, so she has worked in government agents and things like that where there wasn't a broad understanding. Do you feel that there is a broadening in mainstream services now, or do you still feel more kind of at home or comfortable in places that are more specific?
Do you mean the disability community and the pride community, or one or the other?
I mean
Either.
both. I
Yeah,
mean,
both.
Complicated question.
Yeah.
I've worked in mostly non-for-profit organizations across mental health, disability, and LGBTQI spaces. I will say that none of those spaces have included or have catered to both that intersection. So where I have worked for LGBTQIA plus organizations largely catered towards youth or early professionals or that kind of age group, there has been some significant advocacy needed to accommodate disability. And I think this, the reverse is the same. And the other thing that I would say is that, where organizations may be doing good work doesn't mean that they are accommodating all of the community. And that becomes really clear when you are a person with intersecting, like as a queer person, I have found by and large that my queer identity has been accommodated or accepted or valued a lot more than my gender identity. The reality is that being a trans person right now is really difficult. And even within nonprofit organizations, there's still a long way to go. And you can be vocal and open, and I'm always really upfront about who I am on my resumes. Like, people hiring me, nothing is hidden. They know what they're getting themselves into. But yeah, there's still a lot of work, in my opinion, that still needs to be done in those spaces. And that's like, just because an area is a nonprofit doesn't mean that they get it or are doing, everything right, in my experience. But I don't know about others.
I work for the NDIA. It's getting there. No, so one of my main roles as the senior co-design and community engagement advisor is to lead the LGBTIQA strategy, because they do recognize that they need to grow and they need to develop. They need to, collect data on the fact that LGBTIQA participants actually exist, because I'm one of them. And I think that is, in government particularly, there is, we know bureaucracy exists. We know that there's lots of levels of approval. We know that there's lots of change that needs to happen. And there's people from older generations that just don't get it, but that's not an excuse. And so, they are focusing on creating change, but that change just happens really slowly. And I think that is what is difficult, because on the outside, you don't recognize that, because you don't know what's happening behind the scenes, because you don't know there's 15 layers of approval to get a title on a document accepted. And so things are happening, but I think it's happening quite slowly. But it depends on also what department you're working for, what area you're working in, and how committed they are to creating that change. and how loud you are as a staff member in the area. Like, so, you know, obviously we all know that there are challenges with this scheme itself, but I don't work in that area. I only work from a systemic overarching level that focus on the LGBTIQA strategy. So I can only comment on that. And I know that they want to create change and they are employing lived experience, people with lived and professional experience to create and lead that. But it does take time because not everybody is there. Not everybody is on my understanding or my level, or even, you know, has the awareness or understanding. So we, you know, you need to know what the baseline of change is and then work with that to create that change over time. So it is quite difficult, but it is happening. In terms of, I've never worked for profit. I've only ever worked for government, local government, federal government, state government, and not-for-profits. And honestly, it varies. You know, if it's a small organization that, you know, doesn't have a HR department, when stuff happens, what can you do? You know, it can be difficult and challenging if they don't have that awareness or understanding. And sometimes if you're the only person that represents your community, you feel like they come to you to educate everyone on everything. So if you're the only disabled person, they're like, okay, you must know everything about disability. If you're the only queer person, you must know everything about being queer. And that does come with so much pressure. So then you utilize that and you go, okay, if you want that, you pay me to do the work, even if that's not a part of my role, you include that, or you get professional development. So you utilize that and then you use that as a way to recognize that there are gaps in this organization and there's knowledge that needs to be built, and get that training, that knowledge, so that you're not being reactive, you're being proactive, because you shouldn't start being accessible or gender inclusive or whatever when someone starts working there. You should have all those policies and procedures and frameworks in place already.
Yeah, I've had a very different but similar experience in a way. I've mostly worked for youth disability organizations. And I've found that they have mostly been really understanding. They obviously fully understand youth with disability and very familiar with that, but they're also, there's still small changes that need to happen in understanding kind of that intersection with queer identity. And it is happening, it just takes a bit. I have only worked for not-for-profits. So I understand that funding is a bit more difficult in not-for-profits in bits and pieces. So therefore, getting the resources together, the training and all of that is a lot more difficult, because you have to go through grant application after grant application, and they're not always successful. So that's kind of been mostly my experience. Although I have worked for one disability specific organization that was not very good at understanding that intersection with this specific disability and queer identity. And I did find it quite challenging. I worked only for them for a short amount of time, luckily. But yeah, they definitely have a long way to go. They were also not for profit, but it was they were much bigger not for profit. So it was, yeah, a kind of different scenario. I do find though, because I also volunteer within my local community, as much as I would love for the position that I do to be paid, that local governments are still struggling to understand that intersection of, you know, youth identity with disability identity, with queer identity, just one on top of the other. They look at them very individually rather than collectively. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed more. And I do very much push my local city council to kind of improve on that. Because, you know, as human beings, we aren't just one identity or the other, we are all of our identities. And I think an intersectional approach is something that is very slowly being understood and implemented. And when I say slowly, I really, really mean slowly, like it's a snail pace. Like, oh my God, it is not that hard to understand intersectionality. Please, for the love of God, like I have so many identities, but I get forced to be identified as one or the other. And it's like, even like the NDIA, they don't understand the fact that you can have more than one disability. And I've given that feedback to the NDIS review panel, as I've been in multiple consultations this year. Like, if we can get major governments to understand intersectionality, I feel like that's a huge step forward. But I don't have too much faith in that currently, because you know, we look at the current government systems and they're not exactly working well for people with disabilities, let alone young people themselves. So yeah.
Thanks, Belle. We are running over time. We're going to take one last quick question from online, and then perhaps some short responses at the end, just noting we are running over time and there's lots of logistics around that with our hybrid event and our support people here today.
Basket. Okay, Sam.
Hi, everyone.
Sam said,
My question is to everyone on the panel. Do you think we're getting better at letting everyone feel more comfortable? Or do you think we've got a long way to go still?
Yeah, I think it largely depends on context. So I certainly live and have designed a very beautiful, affirming bubble and spend a lot of my time in those spaces. Yeah, and so in those spaces, I would say I feel very accommodated and welcomed and all of those things. But, you know, the reality is I receive harassment every day when I catch public transport. You know, I don't feel like I can be out as part of or with all aspects of my identity when I receive medical care, because I am likely to receive poorer medical care. And as a person with 7+ disabilities, that is not something that I can necessarily risk. So yeah, it's hard. It's context specific. And I mean, even when you think about things like accessing LGBTQ events, are they accessible for all members of the community? Can everybody even walk or enter those spaces or enjoy those spaces and contribute equally as everybody else in the room? Not always. So yeah, it's complicated, but at the same time, I very much cushion that those difficult experiences by surrounding myself closely with people that make me feel really affirmed and comfortable. So it's about seeking those safe spaces.
Thanks, Mon. We would like to thank everyone for continuing our Pride and Conversations with your questions. Thank you to everyone for joining us online and in person for this event. We would like to again thank the Victorian Pride Centre for having us today. We'd like to thank our Auslan interpreters who have been off in the sidelines if you're on Zoom. And we'd also like to thank Joy Media for helping us with tech. And we really appreciate all the support. We encourage people to take reflection upon what we've been talking about today. Remember that sometimes some of these topics can impact us personally and perhaps in ways we don't expect. We encourage people to practice self-care and refer to a service number that's on the provided service numbers list. We would like to thank everyone so much for joining us. If you don't know much about WDV, you can get information from the displayed information on the table that we pointed out earlier, or online that will be shared with people, and we will be sending out follow-up information. You can also visit us on our website at www.wdv.org.au. I would also like to thank Vanessa Davis and Bridget Stone for their support online. And the most important thank you I have is to our very wonderful panel members who came and shared their lived experience with us. And as we know, sometimes talking about such personal things, it is hard, as they discussed, but they do it, and they do it with such grace and passion. And I'm very excited to be hearing and seeing such wonderful people being advocates and activists out in the world. So once again, can we please thank Mon Ince, Bell Fantasia, and Akii Ngo. This is where we leave our live stream. For those online, please stick around. There will be an opportunity to have personal reflective conversations in breakout rooms, but we'll say goodbye and thanks to those online.